How you doing?
How are you?
Dan, good to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Good. Let's go and take a walk up here, shall we? Up by the canal.
I take the kids down here fishing quite often.
Uh-huh.
We don't catch anything, but it's just to get them out of the house. And again,
In this Speaking of Suicide podcast, we're going to hear a story of hope, a story of recovery, and a story of how you can change things no matter how difficult that might feel for you right now, today. I've come to meet Paul, who got in touch with Mikeysline, wanting to share his story on Speaking of Suicide. Paul's is a story of how he shifted his life from a place of huge anxiety, depression and suicidal thoughts to being positive, happy to expose his vulnerabilities as we're going to hear, and carrying a completely different internal story in his head. Now, just before we hear from Paul, a reminder. Speaking of Suicide does cover some pretty difficult territory. So if you need to, you can press pause. And you can also talk to Mikeysline if you need some help and support. I'll give you their details in a wee bit.
it's funny as well. It's because every time I see one of these, I'm like, oh, what's going on? What's happening? What are they doing?
I love this bit here, at the
it's
locks.
lovely.
I used to come up in the afternoons after work and just sit up here and watch the boats
Yeah,
coming back and forth.
it's nice. There's something, especially with the kids, there's something about the kids in water that they absolutely love.
Yeah.
We have paddle boards and that we take out in the summer, and they're never off them. Never off them.
We're just up by the canal at Muirton Basin. Why don't we just head down the canal path a wee bit and towards Cali Marina. Paul, what made you want to get in touch with the podcast and tell your story in the first place?
I felt it was my duty to do it. It was important for me, having gone through what I've gone through, is to share my story, to give people hope that it is possible for you to recover. It's necessary to yourself to really believe me when I say it's possible to recover. That's one of the main reasons.
When you say it's possible to recover, you're saying that now, probably with an awful lot of hindsight and a lot of self-reflection
Yeah.
and insight, and we'll go back and we'll talk about all of that over that. But how far have you come? Tell me about life today. How do you look after your mental health today? What are the key things you do?
For the key thing is to be grateful. Every morning that I wake up, I am grateful that I get to wake up, because for a long time I didn't want to. I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to do anything. And I didn't want to feel anything. Yeah. And now the whole thing is shifted on its head. I have more happiness and joy in my life because of me, because I chose to change. And I chose to take the support that I needed at that time to become who I am today.
Was there a moment when you realised you needed, I'm guessing there is a moment, or there was a moment when you realised that you needed to take that help and that support?
So that was in 2017, and externally I had everything. I had a house, I had children, I had a wife, I had the car, the van, I had my own business. And I was driving to work one day, and again, the same terrible thoughts that I was having, and I was driving down this road far too quickly, and as I'm driving down the road, I said to myself, if I just hit this tree, I'll stop thinking. You know, I'll be able to sleep, I'll be able to not have these feelings. And I counted exactly 6 trees that I passed, and every tree I was almost sort of nudging the steering wheel closer and closer to that tree, and just do it. You'll stop thinking, you'll stop punishing yourself, you'll stop having a go at yourself, until I found this lay-by. And I pulled into lay-by and I cried my heart out. I howled, I pleaded, I looked at the sky, I looked at everything, and I was like, please help me. I need some help. This pain is too much. I've been carrying it for so long, and I can't do this anymore. And as I'm telling you this, I'm sort of reliving it, and that was the point where I thought, as I'm screaming and as I'm crying and as I'm howling, there's a little voice in my head that said, "It's you. It's you that needs to change. It's you that needs to look after you." And that was the turning point for me, massively.
Let's go right back to the beginning. It's just starting to spit with rain a little bit here now. Hopefully we won't get soaked. But let's go back to the beginning. Today you're doing lots of videos on TikTok about looking after your mental health and self-care. And I was looking through one of those videos the other day, and there's one that says, where you say that your childhood dictates how you interact with the world.
Massively.
And I wonder, what was your childhood like? Did that help dictate how you interacted with the world leading up to that moment?
Absolutely. My childhood was far from perfect. It was very traumatic. My parents were dealing with their own stuff as well as bringing me up. And it made, when I say interaction, with all the anxiety and depression and traumatic incidents that happened in my upbringing, there were constant stories playing in my head, how I wasn't good enough. And especially in my upbringing, I was constantly, and again looking back now in hindsight, I was constantly seeking approval. I was looking for safety. I was looking to be heard. And as I grew up interacting with people and interacting with life itself, I could quite easily put a mask on, and it became part of my ritual to put that mask on, act in the world that everything is okay. But again, at night time I would take the mask off, I would lie in bed, and it would be the constant childhood stories and incidents and things that were said to me and situations that I was put in was causing me so much distress. It was causing me so much anxiety, and it was...
At a young age?
Yeah, at a young age. It was...
I mean, sorry to interrupt you. How old were you at this stage that you're describing?
8, 9, 10. There's obviously to protect, family members, etc. There was incidents in the house that I grew up in that were not talked about until later years, because it was to keep everything going as it should be, and everything was okay and everything was fine and there was no problems, no issues, and having to subconsciously hold on to that and being unaware that these things were actually causing me distress in my teens and in my adults was horrifying. I never gave my childhood the respect, the acknowledgement of how bad it was actually, because I would have people say to me again that it wasn't that bad, just forget about it. It's not that bad. It didn't really happen like that. Paul, it never happened like that. And the constant suppression came to that point in 2017 when I fell apart.
But that constant suppression, I suspect, was that your way of coping with it? Because as young people, and I remember in my younger years, you're trying to deal with so much, so many emotions, conflicting feelings, your hormones are changing, your brain is evolving, you're trying to work out where you fit in the world, and then if you've got chaos, and I'm not trying to read into your situation, but if you've got chaos and you've got what you feel as a young person isn't support around you, that can add to it. So you were trying to suppress all of this.
Yeah.
How did that reappear in your teenage years or anything like that? How did your teens go? Because it must have been a difficult time.
It was difficult. As you grow older and you become a teen, you try and seek your own independence and try and make your own independent decisions. Mine at the beginning of my teens was not great decisions. And again, you know, in my teens, I played high level of sport. I played, you know, for Inverness itself. I played shinty, I played bits of rugby, I played ice hockey. I played loads of different things. Now from the outside, everything was fine and it was good, and look at him, he's a sportsman. But again, the same feelings, the same thoughts, the same angst, sort of deeply embedded. And in terms of suppression, it was the only thing I knew how to do. It was the only thing that
It's a survival instinct.
It's totally,
isn't it?
and
it's a natural instinct that you don't know where it comes from.
Yeah.
But it appears. It's just starting to really rain. Sorry to interrupt you, but we'll turn our backs on it for a wee minute. What about role models? As you were growing up, you mentioned your parents there briefly, and let's be very clear, you're not blaming your parents for this in any way at all. But what about role models in your life? Did you have a role model to look up to?
I did. Again, my parents were massive role models, and as well as everything that happened in my childhood, you know, parents in particular have showed me resilience and the ability to come back, and honesty, etc. But and my grandmother, she is just incredible. Like we all kind of know our grandmothers, but she was, and I'll be biased about this, she was probably one of the best grandmothers to have that title. And she supported me the best way that she could, gave me stability, gave me love. She gave me so much love. Sometimes it might not come across that way, but my role models, absolutely my grandmother. She was absolutely incredible. But just touching on the suppression as a thing, it's the only thing that I knew. It's because, you know, knowing now, kids don't really listen to what you say, they watch what you do. And it was difficult for me to see anybody releasing any suppression. It was all built up, which was causing behaviours. And also I watched them, so I even if I knew somebody who had let go, I didn't know the feelings and thoughts that I had. One, were valid, and two, were how do I do this? How do I navigate this?
Because it's incredibly complex for a young person's brain as they're trying to work everything out. As you say, if that's the world you're being brought up in, that becomes your normal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Is that what, as you became older and you into adulthood and living your own life, is that how those behaviours were repeating themselves? Is that what you're saying?
The behaviours were definitely repeating themselves. And just to touch on the normal thing, and I realised this again as I was older, is I would go for sleepover at friends' house and I'd find their interaction with family members odd. But knowing now...
In what way? Describe it to me.
It was very calm. It was very normal, as you'd say. So because I was so used to that much chaos, when I was brought into a calm environment, it didn't make sense to me, and it was that's not the way it should be done. That's, for me, that's not right.
What was your normal?
Very eggshells. What's going to happen next? Very, very... You didn't know whether you were coming or you were going, or something would happen. And it kind of went beyond the household, as it were, in school. I would be in school, did not know what I was coming back to, leaving for school, not wanting to leave because I didn't know what I was coming back to. I didn't know what I was leaving or what would happen. And it made it very, very difficult to relax. So whenever I came towards a calm environment, I would evidently make my own chaos. I found comfort in that. If everybody else was being calm, I would be chaotic. And then the world would be right. That made more sense to me than letting out feelings or communicating what I felt. And again, all this sort of learnt behaviour.
Was letting those feelings out and communicating what you felt, was that difficult for you? Was it even possible for you?
Because I had so many years of suppression, everything came out in a different order or back to front, and I would flip from what's happening now to what happened 10 years ago, to what's happening next week, to what happened 6 months ago. I had so much built inside of me. When the sort of valve, if you want to call it, released, it all came out. The whole story came out. But part of me, and especially in 2017, I wanted the story to come out and I wanted it to stay out. So then I could start building my own beliefs, where I wanted to be, where I was going, and what I wanted for my children.
You mentioned your children there. I wonder, I remember very, very vividly finding out I was going to become a parent, and then spending a lot of time thinking about what sort of parent I wanted to be. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, Paul, I found that really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know. There were times I thought I knew what I don't want to be, but I wonder what did being a parent, it's meant to be one of the happiest moments of our lives, but what was it like for you finding out you were going to become a dad? Because it can be a frightening time as well as a joyous time.
Yeah, and absolutely. I was absolutely delighted when I found out, first off, that my wife was pregnant, and the build-up, the new prams, the new stuff was all exciting. It's a new venture, and as much as I love my son dearly, he is the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I genuinely mean that. But when I was faced with the almost employment of, now you're a dad and this is a lifelong thing, again it started to trigger a wee bit of the story. You know, I had my son in my hands, and one of the things I said to him, I says, I'm never going to let anything bad happen to you. But I wasn't really talking to him. I was really talking to me and everything that was going inside, and the story of all the bad things that had happened to me. And it triggered a lot of emotions in me, so I made it my absolute priority to go through whatever process I need to go through to become the father or the mother or the parent that I needed. And with that focus and that dedication and prioritising that first made me completely different as a human being.
So you were trying to become the parent that you had never had for your son.
Mm-hmm.
What was the vision that you had in your mind?
The vision that I had is to love them. That is the fundamental thing. If you're an adult, if you're a teen, if you're a child, we all need love. We all need, in our hard times, to be able to look around and go, that person. It's not, I don't need you to give me advice, I just want you to give me a hug. I want you to just be there while I'm going through this and show up. That's the most important thing. If you love and it's probably the only time that you'll love something unconditionally, no matter what they do or what they say or who they are, that's what you need to be. That's, for me, what I needed to get rid of all anger, angst, hatred towards people in my life and become a loving person who no matter what they do, I'll always be there. And that's it. That's the only thing you need as a parent. Just be there.
How much of a challenge was that for you, given everything you've described so far about your childhood, about the way you were, your younger years? How hard was it to push that anxiety and that depression away and be that parent you wanted when you were young?
The hardest thing I'll ever do. It was difficult, but that doesn't take away from the fact how rewarding
Absolutely.
it is now.
Yeah.
I mean, we do things that are hard. You know, if it's worth doing, it's going to be hard. And
was it internal pressure that was making it hard for you, or was it external pressure?
I think what I was looking for is, again, the external approval, but also for everybody to go, you're doing it right. You know, this is the right way to go, you're doing it right. But what I was saying is, internally, you're doing it. You know, all the internal stuff I was projecting outside. And it wasn't until I started to go through my stuff, took myself away from everything that I could, and went really, really internal, that I started to discover more of me. And this is important, is when you start a process of working on yourself, it is not going to change you as a person. What it's going to do is reveal more of who you are. So the more loving side, the more caring side, the more positive self-talk. These are the things that it will bring out in you. And I want to be the person that is the example. I used to make examples of everybody else, how bad they were to me, or my negative self-talk. Now I want to make an example of where you can go and who you can become going through whatever process it is that you choose, is to be kind to yourself. Slowly turn the page. Start writing your own story and becoming more of you.
And rewriting that internal story,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, started with you when you pulled the van over
Mm-hmm.
and sat in that seat and cried and looked up, that you described earlier on.
And that in 2017, that was probably the first time that I've ever given in. I didn't give up, I gave in, and I allowed it to all flow out. And I think that is massively important. We talk about quite often as the rock bottom. I think that is a beautiful place to start, because if you're at the bottom, you can only go up. There's no other direction that you can go. And if you give in and just let it out, that's the beginning of a great story, in my opinion.
Let's just pause there for a second, Paul, because if anyone listening to this is feeling that they're at rock bottom and they want some help, or Paul's story is striking a chord with you, don't forget, if you need someone to talk to, you can text Mikeysline on 07786 207755, or you can contact them via Messenger, webchat and Twitter. That number is 07786 207755. Paul, let's look at the now, because you said there about starting to rewrite your story. I think for anybody, and myself included, but especially men, opening up about our emotions and our vulnerabilities can sometimes be very hard. But what was the trigger in you that said, I'm going to do this, but more importantly, I'm comfortable doing it? It's okay to do this, and I'm comfortable just to let it all go.
Well, I think the sort of consequences of me giving in sort of opened a door where at that point my wife had started going to a yoga studio. And when my wife went to the yoga studio, she said, why don't you come along? Because she can see that I'm tense and stuff like that. And again, I said, that's not my kind of thing. So I thought, do you know what? Again, interrupt that pattern, do something that you're not too comfortable with, and go with it. And as being athletic and yoga, stretching, and I couldn't balance. I couldn't do any of the moves, I couldn't do anything. And the yoga teacher turned to me and said, you're not breathing. And I went, it's easy to breathe, I can breathe. And that's what started me on the course of, excuse me, looking around at all these people, and none of them, some of them weren't good, they weren't great, people were excellent, but they weren't bothered about that. They were more concerned about the breathing, about the themselves. They were more concerned about themselves.
The focus,
yeah.
Isn't it? It's about drawing all that energy in and channeling it.
Yeah, and again, it's not, you don't go by my rules, but if you're at a point where you give in, you reach out to whatever it is that you feel you need to reach out to. There's no set rule for this. Everybody has their own stories, and everybody has their own recovery. It's unique to you. So whatever that you feel to go reach out to, Mikeysline, mental health workshops, anything.
When you started doing the yoga and you were trying to rewrite the story in your head that you've described, was there a moment where you felt that story start to change?
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
just smiled. You just smiled
Yes.
there when you said that.
Yeah.
Well, describe to me what the moment was, but more importantly, what did it feel like for you? How did the world change?
I once, as I was doing my yoga, we would do a meditation at the end. And I didn't really know what a meditation was, and in my brain I couldn't meditate. So when we're going through this meditation, I felt this sort of baggage that I was holding. Again, stories, trauma, childhood, and it felt that I cut the cord. And again, I didn't cut it completely, but I cut enough off it to feel some sort of, I could breathe. I could reintroduce myself into the family where I'm more present with my kids, more present with my wife, and I was able to articulate my emotions a lot better because I didn't have part of the story. My recovery from this has been years and years and years, but that doesn't take away the part of the start. Still feels, as I smiled there, the start of it was the most incredible thing that I felt. And then I had this voice that said, well, if this is possible, what else is? And as we start to build the story, we look back at, well, I personally look back at me in that van and go, thank you. Thank you for giving in. Thank you for falling apart. Thank you for crying your eyes out, because if you didn't do that, you wouldn't be here.
What's your relationship, if you don't mind me asking, with your parents like today? Now you've revisioned the world around you.
Because I've done so much work on myself, I understand them better. I understand people make mistakes. I understand that people have their stuff going on too. And that doesn't take away the fact of how I was brought up, but it allows me to connect with them on a deeper level as opposed onto the surface and everything that I'm holding on to. It allows more loving as opposed to the sort of standoffish, and understanding, not an excuse, but understanding that they have some stuff they went through too, and it makes it easier for me. And it has to be, I'm going to say, it has to be selfish from your side. It helps me, and if it helps me, I will continue to do it.
You said in one of your TikToks, I mean, no, actually, tell me before I go into that. Tell me a wee bit about your TikTok channel. What are you doing with it today, and how are you using it? And there was one particular of your wee videos that really struck a chord with me that I'll ask you about. But the channel itself, how are you using that to spread this message?
Offering information. If I can offer information that's widely available to people, and they take the information I give them and use it, if it resonates, take it with you, and if it doesn't, let it be. That's the most important thing for me.
Paul, there was something else that you said on one of your TikToks that really struck me, and I was reminded a wee bit about Tom Stoltman, who talked about autism is his superpower. And you said vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's a superpower. How has it exposing your vulnerable side empowered you?
Well, vulnerability for me, again, is when I gave in. It showed that I'm human. I understand that now. The more and more that I look into what vulnerability is, I am sort of shown, and I think I mentioned this to you before, there's a series on Netflix called The Last Kingdom, and there's a man called Uhtred on it, and he is, an incredible human being. He's smart, strong, commanding, in control. But there's several times within the series that he has to kneel to the king and kiss his hand. He doesn't do that because he has to. He does it because he knows the impact. If I am not show vulnerability here, the impact it will have on me and everybody else. Vulnerability, and to express it, is an awareness, and it makes you stronger. A lot of people will be told that vulnerability makes you weaker. Trust me, it makes you stronger, 100%. And I think you would be surprised if you showed vulnerability to one of your friends, how quickly that would have been reciprocated, and they've gone, thank God you did it, because now I can do it. I think it's our responsibility to show that vulnerability, so then it shows the next generation of people, it's okay. You can do this, and no one's going to feel any differently towards you whatsoever. And this is how we change not only yourself, but you change a generation. And that's important. I think every video I do, again, is revealing more of who I am. And if I get to lead a life, I've already done it. I've helped myself. And I could quite easily go off into the sunset and live the rest of my days, but I feel it's my responsibility to serve people. And if I can give them a bit of hope or a bit of understanding as to what is causing them to go through what they're going through, that's it, I've won.
Where does that sense of responsibility to serve others come from then?
My belief is that I went through stuff in my childhood to learn from it, not repeat it, but also to educate. Anyone that wants to help somebody with their mental health, in my book, is the greatest person that could possibly live. And if somebody has been through something, recovered, I think it's their duty to help. I do. I think it's their duty to be the person you needed back then. Because if me now going back to my younger self, I would have loved somebody to come along and go, do you want to go for a walk? Let's go and suss this out. Let's go and shift you a wee bit in a direction. And I would have loved that. And that's now my responsibility to do it for others.
And I guess you probably have those fairly open and frank conversations with your children today to enable them to feel that sense of security and safety.
As much as I can. My kids can, over the last couple of days in the evenings, well, as they're going to bed, they've asked me to do a meditation, and I speak the meditation, and they love it, and it gets them to relax and stuff like that, and they like me doing that. And sometimes I look at them, and my son is 9, my daughter is 6, and I've got a daughter who's 1. She's not there yet, but they can regulate their emotions so much better than I can. And if they need time to breathe, they need time to breathe. If they've got something to say, they will say it in a room of no judgment. Because I've gone through something like that, and I understand how important it is for kids to express how they feel and get it off their chest so they can enjoy the rest of the day. And it's fantastic. I've already won. I've already done it. So anything else is a bonus.
And we started our conversation today talking about 2017.
Yeah.
2024. I think I know the answer to this. What's life like now for you, and where will it take you?
Incredible. That's all I can say is incredible. I've got big goals for this year. I have started working myself to become the person that I want to be, which is somebody that goes out and helps, somebody who starts charities, whatever it may be, to support mental health. And we'll be travelling quite a lot. We have got places we want to see, places that we want to go. And to be honest with you, I'm just enjoying every single day as it comes. That's the whole focus that I have is, you'll have down days, have a down day. You know, you'll have days that you struggle, have days that you struggle. But it's not taken away from the end goal, which is my personal thing, is to live a life driven by enjoyment and excitement and love. That's basically it.
Paul, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story on speaking of suicide with me today and being so open. We'll put a link to Paul's TikTok channel in the show notes of this episode. And if you'd like to tell your story on speaking of suicide like Paul did, then just get in touch with Mikeysline and let them know. Here's Shona from Mikeysline with a few thoughts to take away from our conversation today.
Listening to Paul there, I guess as he said at the start, his message is it's possible to recover from trauma. Something clearly happened to him when he was a child that had a massive impact on his mental health. I think his story illustrates some important truths or facts. Firstly, that as much as we can try and suppress traumatic experiences, and our society often encourages us to do so, our body and our mind still know, they still remember, they still hold and feel that pain. These things don't just go away. Somebody I look up to, a trauma specialist called Gabor Mate, says when someone is struggling with their mental health, not to ask what's wrong with you, but rather to ask what happened to you. And then the second thing coming from that at some point the suppression of trauma can lead to anxiety, depression, and maybe eventually to a crisis point, as it did for Paul. And then thirdly, there's no one way to find healing. I think Paul unexpectedly stumbled across a yoga class and ended up in a meditation, and that seemed to be a real turning point for him, turning inward and focusing on his healing. And from that experience, his hope grew, his healing grew. It might be different for you. It might not be a yoga class. It could be having counselling, therapy, finding connection to something that makes you feel alive, that feels bigger than you, reading or the arts. Whatever speaks to you and helps you find that hope inside could be the beginning of that healing. And then finally, just so much respect for Paul sharing so vulnerably and honestly on the podcast and in the TikToks that he does. And how that shows us that not only can we heal from trauma, but actually the source of our pain can become a source of healing for others. So beautiful to witness that in this podcast.
A huge thanks to Shona and all the team at Mikeysline for the work they do. And don't forget, if you need someone to talk to or some help, then you can text Mikeysline on 077 86 20 7755 or contact them via Messenger, webchat or Twitter. And the number for WhatsApp is 01463 729 000. Or you can go and visit them at The Hive, 19 Academy Street in Inverness. They're open 7 days a week from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. And all those details and links are in the show notes too. Speaking of Suicide is funded by Mikeysline, and the platform is sponsored by Highland-based family firm D&D Paving Limited. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, do get in touch because we'd love to hear from you. Speaking of Suicide is produced by Adventurous Audio Limited.